And what we're going to talk about today is Black culture to blame for Black failure. And the reason why I want to kind of go into this video is because there's a lot of narratives online that there's something wrong with Black culture. And one of the reasons why so many Black people fail is because there's something wrong with Black culture. And I'm going to kind of give my opinion on this particular analysis of Black culture and why I kind of don't agree with this. And I think it's very short-sighted, and I don't think it's based on a lot of really in-depth understanding of what culture actually means. So this is going to be 100% my opinion. Most people won't agree with me because, in my opinion, they haven't really taken time to really do the study, and they don't really understand their position in this particular situation, and they don't really understand their culture. So we're going to go ahead and get into that and get into a little bit deeper. And I definitely want to reach out to the audience, because what's interesting is that, I look at platforms and there's, 30 people talking for 3 hours about certain things. And then when you ask people questions about what they say they believe, we're very hard pressed to get those particular answers from people, right? And so what we're trying to do is move the platform to be a little bit more interactive. And so I'm gonna kind of ask people questions about their perception around this idea of culture, but especially Black culture, right? Because we got to kind of understand where are we getting these ideas from. So really quickly, before we get up on out of here, we're having a September sale for the highest paid part-time job in the world options trading academy. That sale will be over, I want to say Saturday in the evening sometime before it turns into Sunday Eastern Standard Time. You can get 15% off using the particular code inflation. And I would tell you to go ahead and look into that. A lot of y'all 401ks have gotten destroyed this year. And it's because you don't know how to play the downside of the market, right? So let's go ahead and get back into the topic. So the first question we want to kind of ask ourselves is, what is culture? Because many people will say that, well, there's something wrong with Black culture. And then you ask them, well, what is culture? And they can't explain it. Now, they can have their own definition of culture, but my question is, well, then give me your definition of culture. So what we're really quickly going to do is watch a video kind of based on what we believe culture to be. And then based on us believing on what we believe culture to be, we're better to able to expand on this question of, is Black culture to blame for Black people's failure? Because you can get a lot of traction on this YouTube by blaming Black people for everything. And that's not anything new. A lot of these people are tapping into a lot of really, really old tropes that have been around literally before we were born. And they're going to be here after we're gone, because they're kind of based on how this particular system in America, but not just America, worldwide, was set up. Right. And so when you're able to tap into how the actual system is set up, it's able to allow you to get a cheat code, because we know how people have been socialized before you ever got to them. So if I know that people believe certain things, it's easy for me to persuade and influence them around what I know they already believe. And I know what people already believe about Black people. So it's easy for me to get elevated in this society if I just play into what they already believe based on how they've been programmed and been socialized. But first, if we're going to talk about culture, then we have to have a definition of culture that we're operating with, right? So we can't be talking about culture, but we don't know the definition of culture that we're operating under. And many people, when you ask them, well, how do you define culture? They can't explain to you. But then they are inferring that something's wrong with Black culture, but they can't explain culture. But it doesn't matter if their audience never asks these kind of questions. So if you know that your audience is really not that smart and you're just a little bit smarter than them, it doesn't matter what you present to them as long as it agrees with what they are to believe. And that's one of the ways in which you can make yourself very, very successful on social media. So what we're going to do really quickly is we're going to get into a video around what do we believe culture to be. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Caribbean life is varied in its definition. As such, it cannot be limited to one singular explanation. Instead, we will briefly present a few definitions that capture the sociological understanding of the term. Culture refers to the sum total of social life. It includes language, beliefs, customs, norms, food, dress, and music. It is a set of normals held by a group of people. This group of people may live in the same geographical place, share nationality, ethnicity, or beliefs. Sir Edward Burnett Taylor defined culture as that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. To symbolic interactionists, culture referred to systems of human meaning. In other words, culture is created by human interactions. It is a structured and organized framework upon which human beings attach meanings and understandings to symbols and their interactions. Culture may also refer to the shared knowledge, beliefs, and values of members of society, and may be passed on from generation to generation through the process of socialization. In sociology, when we speak of culture, we include aspects of social life such as food, dress, language, music, dance, customs, traditions, norms, ideas, and beliefs. So culture essentially speaks to a way of life shared by a group of people. Culture is dynamic. It changes from place to place and over time. The cultural practices of our ancestors may be vastly different to what we practice today. There may be remnants or variations of ancient cultural practices from our ancestors, but over time, the exactness of their lived reality and the norms practiced during their lifetimes are in many ways different to what we know, experience, and share in our contemporary lived reality. There is no one distinctive Caribbean culture, but rather Caribbean cultures. Each island or geopolitical
Okay, so we don't want to sit on that too hard because they're going into specifically now it's talking about Caribbean culture and understanding that there's not one Caribbean culture, but there's multiple Caribbean cultures. And we understand that most people in the Caribbean are black, right? So they understand that there's multiple Caribbean cultures, even though the majority of people in the Caribbean are black. But we've been brought in America to believe that black people have one culture and there's something wrong with that culture that's causing black people to be a failure. So now while we got a basic understanding of culture, the question I want to ask the audience is that where does black culture originate? So based on the argument, let's go with the argument that something's inherently wrong with black culture. Let's go with that. Let's, for the sake of the argument, let's say, okay, we agree that there's something wrong with black culture, which is causing so many black people to fail. So then if there's something wrong with black culture that's causing so many black people to fail, then my question I want to ask the audience is, right, where does black culture originate? Right. So that's the first thing we want to ask the audience is where does black culture originate? Because where does this culture originate that's causing so many people to fail? Okay. So that's the first question we want to ask. And then once we can figure that out, then we can figure out, right, how to solve this problem because we need to know where the problem came from. So what I'm asking the audience is where does black culture originate? Right. So if black culture is the reason why so many people are failing, and it's the reason why so many black people are failing, and if they just would stop participating in black culture, they would be successful. My question is, where is it originating from? Because if we don't know what is the cause of black culture, we could be fighting on the back end, but we're not fighting the source of it. Then we don't know where it comes from. Right. So censorship against the middle pass says it comes from white money. LG says it comes from the home. Okay. So the question we want to ask is, where does black culture originate? So we got 68 people on the mic. Right. So I know this is not the normal relationship live stream. Right. Are we talking about black women having, children out of wedlock, things of that nature? But this is the problem. We buy into these narratives. And when somebody asks us a question about what we say we believe, we can't even communicate our thought pattern. So it goes to show you that it's really not something that we know. It's really something that we've been socialized to believe because we can't even explain it. Right. So how are you a black person and you don't even know where your culture originated from? So where does your as a black American, where does your culture originate? You telling me you have no idea? So this is the issue. We have a group of people that can't even tell you where their culture originated from. Now, if I was to go to speak to a bunch of Mexican people, they could definitely tell me where their culture originated from. Right? If I was to go speak to a bunch of Jewish people, they could tell me where their culture originated from. If I go speak to a bunch of Chinese people, they can tell me where their culture originated from. If I go speak to a bunch of Russian people that immigrate here, they can tell me where their culture originated from. So if you're a black person and you believe that black people have a bad culture that's causing black people to fail, my question is, well, where does your culture originate from? And then all of a sudden we hear church mouse pee on cotton. So you understand is that you don't even know what a culture that you're blaming for the downfall of black people, where it even comes from. So then we're taught that, well, we should study the culture of Chinese people, but Chinese people can tell you where their culture comes from. Right? We should be more like the Asians, where they can tell you where their culture comes from. If you ask a Chinese person right now today that had to leave China because of the Communist Party of China, they can still tell you where their culture comes from. So this is the problem. Right? When you add, so this is what's weird. If I was to get on here and talk about whether or not black women should divest, we'll have 1 million people with a comment. But the same culture that they're saying they need to get away from, where did it come from? Can't tell you. All of a sudden now they don't know what to say. So it goes to show you that you've been socialized to believe something that you don't even have an explanation for. Because the chat should be full of people telling me where their culture came from. So what's really, I want people to note this. On 9/29/2022, we got a room full of black people that can't tell you where their culture comes from. And they're adults. But they're living their culture. So they have shared views, shared beliefs. They have a religion that they adhere to or a religion that they don't adhere to. They have views around the world, but they can't tell you where it comes from. So this goes to show you that they're not even conscious of their behavior. They're just living something out and they can't even tell you where it came from. So based on that, I know I can manipulate you because you don't even know what you're doing and you don't even know where it comes from. That's the issue. So then the next question you want to ask, since you don't know where your culture comes from, second question, what is the culture of your ancestors before they came to America? But I know you can't answer that because you don't know where the culture comes from that you currently participate in today. So I would doubt that you know what the culture of your ancestors before they came to America. Second question, what is the culture of your ancestors before they came to America? Because this country was founded in 1776. So it's really not that old. So before your people was brought from here, right, where does that culture come from? So 724 says it came from the hood. So I don't even know what a hood is. So what is a hood? Explain that to me. I don't know what a hood is. I know what a neighborhood is. I don't know what a hood is. Right? And then the question is, has that neighborhood been around as long as America? So this concept of the hood, has it been around as long as America? Because I had somebody tell me that somebody act like they was from the ghetto. I said, well, they must act like they Jewish because I know where that word comes from. That word was not created to describe black people. It was created to describe Jewish people. But see, when you don't even know where your culture comes from, you pick this stuff up and don't even know what you're communicating to people. So you sound, when you tell somebody else that know what that word means, that somebody acts ghetto, but you're not talking about a person that is Jewish, they know you don't know what you're talking about. You just don't know what you don't know what you're talking about. And they just let you keep talking. Right? So we're going to go back to the second question. Right? What is the culture of your ancestors before they came to America? What's that culture? Because other groups can tell you what the culture was of their ancestors before they came to America. So I was living in Houston metro area. I was dealing with, it was a bunch of Chinese and Vietnamese people out there. It was a bunch of Indian people out there. We had Hindu temples where I lived. We had Buddhist, Chinese Buddhist temples where I lived. Right? Big temples on big pieces of land, really elaborate, especially them Hindu temples. They're something different. Look like a college. That's how big it is. They know the culture of their ancestors before they ever came to America. So if you don't know where your culture comes from in America, and then you don't know what was the culture of your ancestors before they came to America, and this is not a country that's even been around 1,000 years. This country's been around less than 500 years. It's really not that long ago. So then the question is, how can you comment on culture if you can't define your current culture and you don't know the culture of your people before they ever came to America? So then how are you blaming a culture that you're not even informed on? So that's the question. We got 102 people in the chat, but everybody should be telling me, well, my culture was this before my people showed up in America. How come you don't know? And then how do you define your current culture? Where did it come from? So you got a group of people that's been in this land right now. You got some people believe we was already over here. But for the people that don't believe that, they've been here around 400 to 500 years. So what is their culture? Where did it come from? Can't explain it. But you'll let somebody tell you that black culture that you don't know where it comes from, and you also don't know the culture of your people before they showed up here, right? So what is that culture? You don't know, but it's responsible for something. Okay, let's go to the next question, right? So you can't define. So the next question is, how do you define black culture? What's your definition of it? But you don't know the origin of black culture in America or the North America. You don't know the culture of your ancestors before they came to America. So then how do you define black culture? What's your definition of it? What's the definition? So how do you define black culture? How do you define it? Even though you can't define, you don't know the culture of your ancestors. We already determined that. And you don't know where black culture originated from. So how do you define black culture? So my question is, how do you do calculus if you can't do basic arithmetic? right? So in math, you learn basic arithmetic. Then you learn, I'm include fractions, multiplication, division in the basic arithmetic. Then you learn algebra. Then they teach you calculus. You can't do calculus without algebra. In fact, most people don't fail calculus. You know what they fail? They fail algebra. You know why they fail algebra? Because they didn't learn basic mathematics. So we're going to ask the same question. How do you define Black culture? Nobody can answer it. But they can talk about all these other cultures. What's your definition of Black culture, since it's the blame for Black failure? How do you define it? Right? So Miss Moon say American culture. PhD program is stating today, if you don't know the mark of the room, then it's you. I feel you. So I can't pronounce your name, so I apologize. Do we have a strong marriage culture? That's not the question, but I appreciate you commenting. So Mr. Watts says, I define my current culture by the strides of accomplishment of my family and Blacks in early America. So is that how you define Black culture or your current culture? Well, I appreciate the comment. Big up to you. So we go, how do you define Black culture? So you're going to let somebody tell you Black culture is the blame for Black failure, but you can't even define it? See what I'm saying? You couldn't go to a Chinese person and tell them that Chinese culture is the reason for the problems in China, right? And you can't define Chinese culture. But we talk about Chinese culture being the reason why Chinese people are successful. Is Chinese culture the same reason why the Chinese Communist Party has killed literally probably over 100 million Chinese people? Is that Chinese culture? Is that the reason for that? Because it can't be one and we exempt the other. So is Chinese culture the reason why the Communist Party of China, that involved a bunch of Chinese people, has killed over 100 million Chinese with bad government policy? Is that the reason for that? That they try to export to other Asian people, which killed them too? But you couldn't tell a Chinese person that Chinese culture is the reason why China has the issues that they have, and you can't define Chinese culture. You couldn't tell a Hindu person that Indian and Hindu culture is the reason why they got so much poverty in their land, and you can't define their culture for them. You couldn't do it. So I'm asking you, you're entertaining from somebody that Black culture is the blame for Black failure, but you don't have a definition of Black culture. You can talk about it. So all of a sudden now we start talking about everything under the sun. The cat jumped over the moon. So-and-so scored 30 points last night. We start trying to deflect into other issues because we know we don't have a definition. But you've accepted this idea that there's something wrong with Black culture. Define it then. Because cultures can be defined. So define it. So Tahuti Ross says, Black culture is anti-American, basically opposing everything that has a working track record, but also refuses to adopt another working blueprint. So that's still not a definition. That's just it's a word salad, right? Culture is based on specific ideas, views, language, things of that nature. So we once again, we can't define something that we're causing it to blame. So if I was to take Black culture out and put Chinese culture in and give you that same definition, do you think that would be acceptable to Chinese people? They have a specific culture, right? Based on their genealogy, based on the way in which they communicate, based on their language, based on their religion. All of these things make up their culture. You can't word salad a Chinese person about their culture. You can't word salad an Indian person about their culture. You got to talk about specific things that make up their culture. And then when we define that, I ask you the same question is, where does it come from? And then when I ask where it comes from, then I ask you again, what was your culture before your people showed up here? And then when you ask these people, they start trying to word salad their way out of it. That don't work on me, right? We deal with the markets. That don't work. We deal with real specific things, right? And then we investigate those specific things. So you got people saying that Black culture is something that started 30 years ago. Well, Black people was here before 30 years ago. This concept of the hood, y'all heard that from a rapper. I'm older than some of y'all. Wasn't nobody using that term hood into the 90s. So how does Black culture come from the hood? And that's a word that people weren't even using into the 90s when Black couple was living in this country way before the 90s, right? My great-great-grandfather's from South Carolina. He was living in this country in the 1700s. So did the hood create his culture in South Carolina? What hood? He from a sharecropper plot. So this is the issue. We don't know how to define this stuff. We don't have a working definition around it. And we create word salads around it to try to define it because we haven't sat down and created a working definition around what we call culture. Every other group got a specific thing in which they identify their culture. So we've created this idea that Black people have this generic overall culture that exists around millions of people, but we can't define it. It's ambiguous, right? It's ambiguous. And we still can't define it. No, everybody's telling me everything except how do you define Black culture? Well, how does it define? And so this is the question. This is why they can't define it. How come you have the name of another ethnic group, except the people that changed their name? How come you have the theology of another ethnic group, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So what part of your culture was created by your subgroup? So we got Black people inside the United States. If you look at and I don't want to pronounce this word incorrectly, it starts with an E. It's like etymology. Etymology. I don't know how to pronounce that word, but it's where the actual words come from, where they originate. So if you look at the last name Williams, right? That name originates from England, but really came from Germany, right? So we got Black people inside the United States, right? With Anglo-Saxon names, Italian names, Roman names, Portuguese names, Spanish names, speaking American Standard, who adhere to Western European theology, most likely Calvinism or some deviation of Calvinism, right? Who think they have a culture. So I used to date a Kikuyu girl. You know what she asked me? How come you got the name of white people? I said, because white people own my family. In her tribe, there's a certain set of names that everybody get, and they just repeat the names over and over again. Those names go back to their origin story of how they people came about. So the reason why you know you're dealing with a Kikuyu, why? Because they all carry the same last names. There's a certain group of last names that all Kikuyu people gonna get, whether they male or female. So when you in Kenya or even in East Africa, you know how you know you're dealing with a Kikuyu? Because they all got the same name. They only gonna run so many names as last names, and then they take the name of their grandparent, and that becomes a middle name. And then so you'll meet a lot of people in Kenya that the girl I used to date got her same last name. Why? Because the Kikuyu is a tribe of over 1 million people. That's their culture. They can define that. So how does a bunch of people who got the name of another ethnic group, who have this theology of another ethnic group? I'm talking about being a believer. I'm talking about your theology. Most of y'all are Calvinists. You just don't know it, right? You got the theology of another ethnic group. You speak the language of another ethnic group. And then you've been made to believe you got a culture. The question I ask you again, where does your culture come from then? Because the Kikuyu woman can tell me her culture came from a bunch of people that lived around a particular area of Kenya, and they had a distinct culture before Anglo-Saxons ever showed up in their part of the world. Same thing if you deal with the Zulu down in South Africa. They had a distinct culture before Anglo-Saxons, the Boers, or the British ever showed up in South Africa. They already had their cultures. They had their names, they had their belief systems, they had their religion, they had all of that before the people ever showed up. So my question is, how do a bunch of people who don't practice, right, the culture of their ancestors, they currently have a culture, they don't know where their culture came from, but they know their culture's at fault? The question is, where does your culture come from? Because you don't have the culture of your ancestors. You don't. You don't have the name of your ancestors. You don't have the religious practices of your ancestors. You don't have the theology of your ancestors. You don't have the language of your ancestors. So where does your culture come from? But then Negroes spend all of this long pontifications, well, you know, what's wrong with Black cultures? We won't do this. It's not your culture because you don't have a culture. You have someone else's culture that they created to give you for your assignment in America. And you playing your assignment out. You don't even know that. You can't take this culture and go back 1,000 years with it, like the girl I used to date. She can take her culture and the actual practices of her tribe, and they literally can go back almost 1,000,000 years. It's been Black people living in Kenya going almost 1,000,000. That's why they found the oldest woman is in that particular area. She can go back almost 1,000,000 years with her culture. Zulus can go back literally tens of thousands of years with their culture. You got people living in Brazil, living out there in the wilderness. They can go back tens of thousands of years with their cultural practices. You might can go back 500 years with your culture that you don't even know where it come from. And you telling me your culture come from the hood, a word that came out in the 90s, right? A word that came out in the 90s created by a bunch of rappers that people use and don't even know what it means. Because really, you're supposed to say neighborhood. You ain't from no hood because you're not from a neighborhood. You a square. So how you from a hood? That don't even make no sense.